Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Edan. I am Scott Schnaars, and I'm here with my good friend, as always, Edan Gottlieb. And today we're going to be diving into a question that gets sales leaders and finance leaders really, really fired up, and that's who should own expansion revenue. This is one that I feel pretty strongly about, whether it's sales or it's customer success or even a specific growth team. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If you like what we've got to say, we'd really appreciate you helping out the algorithm by liking and sharing this episode and subscribing to the channel so that you can get Lunch Money delivered to you every week. So, Don, what are your thoughts on expansion revenue going to sales? Should it stay with sales? Should it go to CS? Tell me about your thoughts and opinions on this.
Yeah, that's a very good one. You know, this one is there's everybody has an opinion on it, and you know the answer. It's semi kind of cop out, which is kind of it depends, right? Then it depends on your company size, your product, your sales motions, but we don't want to just leave it at depends. Let's kind of try to break it into the pieces of what's working, what's not working, what's broken, and figure out how do you really best set up for driving expansion revenue the company without breaking everything and creating a mess.
Yeah, because it does become a mess. So let's start with the argument for sales teams owning the expansion. And
go sales.
This is this is the one that I favor the most. And this is my argument for letting the sales team keep it. If a customer has already purchased from a particular salesperson, why wouldn't the salesperson who closed that deal be the one to go expand it? And you and I've had this discussion countless times over our 5 years at Cloudinary. The salesperson already has the relationship. They know the account inside out. They know how to drive bigger deals. They're money motivated. They know how to do sales. So in my opinion, 9 out of 10 times, the salesperson should keep the relationship and run with that deal and that expansion.
Yeah. And, in enterprise sales, this always said makes a ton of sense. I'm a senior AE. I closed a multi-million-dollar deal. You better believe I could take it over to the next level and get 5 million, 10 million out of these customers. This is, to some extent, my deal. I know everything. I should be connected. But I think there are two other elements to take into consideration when you make that choice. And it probably starts all with the potential. What is the potential for this account to get to? What is the kind of the max value or the max number that this account can get to that should be determined whether you keep it or not? And it dovetails to kind of what sales strategy did you use? So let me explain. Right, in general, there's three motions you can have. One is land and expand, which basically means we'll start it, and then I think I could get them to buy more stuff. There is start small, which is like we talked about. It needs to be bigger, but they wanted to start smaller until they feel good about it. And then there is go big, which you take the whole deal right off the bat. If you did a go big, then there's probably not much expansion kind of left into that motion. So you might not want to keep that deal. In the land and expand or start small, it really depends what the full potential is. And if you have a 5, 10, 8, 20x potential, definitely makes sense. But if it's a smaller one, then you should be considering is that the right person to put on that task?
That's interesting. I think that's a really fair point. I think that as we all know, salespeople tend to be more financially motivated than most of the other people inside of your organization. I would argue that if you try to put expansion revenue in the hands of specifically of CS, you have the argument that CS's job is not to go get money; it's to make sure the customers are satisfied, that the customers are successful, depending on what your S stands for there. And generally, they are more compensated to ensure customer success, right? They're being compensated on his NPS score up there. Is we getting customer references, or the customer generally happy and not complaining. They're not compensated for revenue. And oftentimes, if you're a customer success professional, the last thing you want to do while you're building a strong relationship with somebody is be that person who's constantly hounding them for revenue and buying stuff. So, not being comped aggressively enough to chase that revenue in an AE could be like a challenge around expansion. You have to take the risk that maybe your expansion, you might have a happier customer, but the revenue isn't going to be maximized there.
Yeah, and it's an important point because really we put the CS team and the talent we hire for the CS team is about the relationship management, about caring for the customer, making sure that everything they bought is getting used and leveraged and it's working for them. and they're not the ones to go, as you mentioned, kind of push them towards becoming significantly bigger. And if I put it in kind of numbers, it's like if you're expecting the growth of the account to be probably in the range of 0 to 3, 5, 7, 10% kind of a growth, kind of keep with rate of inflation, have some, some pricing adjustments, then the CS motion could cater to that, maybe potentially will. But if you're looking to go beyond, let's say, a 10% increase, then you need to think about the team that what they do on a regular basis is run deals, secure budgets, build value propositions, go beyond, because going beyond 10% of spend is like now you're outside the realm of the initial scope that they have in mind.
Yeah, the other thing that you and I didn't talk about as we were prepping for this, but I'm thinking about it now in real time, is that you have to also convert your CS. Like, as a company, you can't just go, oh, hey, we hired you to be customer success, but now we want you to be salespeople. Like, you now have, as a company, you need to invest in enablement. You need to invest in training. You kind of need to turn these people into sales people and get them away from it. So now they need to learn how to do discovery, and they need how to ask for introductions, and they need to do all of these things that a salesperson probably already has under their belt. So it's not just, oh, hey, CS, we want you to handle this expansion. You have to invest in the CS team in order to ensure that they're really going to be successful too in that capacity.
And to add to that, by the way, as you enable them and move them to be kind of a more salesy oriented, there is something that you should be calling for that you might hurt their basic credibility within the account when they're not associated with money. They're really purist about, hey, I'm here to care that you will maximize what you bought. As soon as you start getting money into their conversation, now their position has been some kind of eroded a little bit about, oh, but money is now part of the mix. And so you could hurt their ability or their credibility within the account by driving such motions and putting them into kind of a sales mix.
So I yes, 100% agree with you. So let's flip that script. Let's talk about the case against sales owning that expansion revenue. If we flip that and we talk about is the argument for customer success or a dedicated expansion team handling it solely to keep this division of church and state, money versus customer success, separate? Is that really the only argument there?
So, here there's the argument and the counter argument. Most people would say, well, salespeople only chase new logos, so they don't really care about the existing customers. Right. And then on the other hand, they will say, well, the problem will be that they will be very complacent, become very complacent because it's easier to sell into existing customers. The saying around, it's kind of easier to go kill something that is in your cage versus things in the wild. So they're going to ignore the new kind of logos. And so you got to have, you have both of these arguments happening at the same time. Yeah. Yeah. Now, the truth of the matter is that, first of all, the company needs new logos. It is an important dimension for any company's growth. So revenue is number one. You need the money. But number two is what kind of revenue you bring in. And so new logos are a very important kind of metric that you want to have, part of that. Now, you bring in incentives as a way to try to correct these things or try to balance them. And this is where things get usually worse. Because the incentives, if you put them as a higher commission rate for new logos to make sure that you cater for scenario 2 of they get complacent and only sell to existing customers, then you'll create a behavior of oh, I'm going to ignore the existing customers. And if they're not kind of, big enough or the upsell is not interesting enough, I'm just going to, let them be. Or if you balance it the other way around, they'll say, oh, it's easier money for me to go and stay with existing customers. So that going for the commissions is the way to solve it, or the incentives, usually ends up in not a good place or an optimal place.
Yeah, every organization I've ever seen, I think rightfully pays more commission on net new logos. But if you choose to let sales own expansion, but you don't structure their quota properly, you're going to end up with, more often than not, you're going to end up with orphan accounts. Hey, we close this, they seem happy, they're not growing, they're not expanding, let's just run with it. And the AE, is going to close that deal, and then they're going to go off and they're going to go chase their next big white whale. And, unfortunately what you have is nobody's really nurturing the existing customers very well at all. And, if somebody, spends $100,000, right, a SaaS deal that's $100,000, and they decide they want to add $5,000 more to that, it's going to be tough to get a seller to embrace that. And those small upsells, oftentimes they're going to go to the wayside, and you're not going to get the behavior that you want. And that's, man, talking about orphan accounts, like that's really where, in my experience, these expansion deals go to die.
Yeah, and even with good compensation structure, if you have these little kind of growth aspects, you're right. The salespeople that are wired for sales would neglect them, and orphan accounts, I think, is a great way to describe them.
I'm going to buy that domain.
Yeah. But I want to add something else to this. I think there's a second layer to talk about here. So this, we talked about the structure and the comp, but there's also kind of a natural way of what people are wired to go and pursue. And some sales reps are really not built for this long process run of just letting a customer kind of get to where they need to be and then start to slowly grow. The slow, expansion motions, sometimes not even just adding on another product and just an incremental movement. They're more wired towards the excitement of the pursuing the new logos, the complexity of nailing a new customer and bringing in something big or something complex. And so they naturally would not be gravitating or be good or like doing this stuff as part of their work, just in terms of the natural talent that they have and what they get, what they like to do. So this is where you start looking, maybe a kind of a dedicated account management team that can really spot and work the expansion opportunities and in those kind of motions would be a better way or a right for that.
Yeah, it's the analogy that I've used in my own career is, I spent all of this time going to medical school, and now I just do stitches, and
Yes.
and that's it, right? Like, that's not what they were bred for. I think that there is a third option into this mix, and that is having a dedicated growth or expansion team that's out there. I think a lot of companies are starting to build out these teams to drive expansion revenue, whether that's through data, through automation, through product-led growth tactics. You have these expansion teams that are this like hybrid of sales and CS that know how to sell, but like maybe don't necessarily want the pressure of having like a quarter in, quarter out quota, and want to maintain some of these existing accounts and grow them. Like, what have you seen work there in terms of growing revenue?
Yeah, this is the idea behind all the growth teams that you start seeing, spurring around everywhere. And it's not just sales or customer success. It's kind of a hybrid approach to the motion and assembling kind of a different team that kind of sits in the middle. You take sales ops and marketing and data analytics and kind of mix them all together, and they're all working to try and figure out, where expansions are potentially happening and how do we pursue them in the most kind of efficient way. And there's some pros to that, right? It's you bring in this more data-driven approach, much more than sales usually would do, and then you can really scale it well. Because you're not relying on just individual account executives and their skill sets, and to build a lot of automations throughout these processes. They can be the kind of the conduit between sales and customer success in terms of we provide this bridge and data driven and kind of insights of how to go work about it. And if you have a good PLG motion and a self-service and a freemium that you're trying to leverage, it's a very cost-effective way to go about and leverage it. And I think this is where you see the popularity of these teams all of a sudden showing up. But before we get too excited, there's some shortcomings here.
I'm all excited now. What are the... There's got to be a downside to that.
Yeah, and you got to be careful because it does start to slow things down at times because now you got another third party in the middle of trying to do it. So more meetings, more things to be synced about, more reports, more buttons, like more opinions, more things that just slows your ability to continuously innovate as you go to market. It does take away the ownership from sales. And it's not about sales owning it. It's about being associated to revenue and about thinking about revenue, thinking about maximizing revenue. It's a very KPI-driven, good kind of motion, but sometimes that structure limits you to whatever KPI you put in place versus the sales world of there's no limits. It's like what you imagine, and if you could put the right things together, you bring these kind of deals in play. So you lose that true potential to skyrocket by having that kind of mechanism. And it doesn't fit every business. I mean, usage-based, self-service friendly, it does work well. But sometimes you don't even have enough data to get these things into the right motion. So you get the wrong conclusions, or you run through different things that are not good. So it's not all structures can really benefit from that.
The taking the ownership away from sales is a really important one. And I remember, both at Cloudinary and at Dynamic Signal before that, there were scenarios where a seller would close a deal, and then 6 or 9 months later, when things were going sideways and maybe the expansion rep couldn't help out with it, we'd have to have like the salesperson reach out and do a Hail Mary to try and save these things. And at the same time, the sales guy's like, look, like, you took it away from me. You're not paying me on it. Like, I'm not, like, I'm out. Like, I haven't talked to them in 9 months because you had this whole expansion team plan. So I think it's important to remember that this isn't I don't think that this is a magic bullet either. I think that if you've got a high touch enterprise type of model, a growth team might be needed to really ensure that the clients are taken care of. But, not necessarily.
Yep. Yeah, I think it depends. We talked about potential before, but even more so probably about scale, right? If you're at a scale now and you're trying, then a growth team set up right could be helpful, right? It takes away, you're talking about doing stitches as the doctor, it takes away some of these pieces. It makes sure that, there's some data that helps us drive getting the insights and the signals that we need from the customer and what's going on with them. They can automate a few things in place. The trick here is really making sure that they're an enabler, not a roadblock. Don't create another entity that now tries to fight with everybody else, and that they stay kind of, like a better word, serving both the customer success and the revenue or sales teams in terms of like, how do we maximize this account versus become kind of their own team with their own agenda kind of in place.
So what are you seeing in your discussions with your clients, Don? I mean, for me, I've got some clients that are keeping expansion with sales, and I've got others that are shifting to the expansion team or hiring out a growth team to make sure that the clients are taken care of at all aspects of the relationship.
Well, I see a mix, and it
Okay.
really
Yeah. So
some companies and they start in different places. Some of them because of something they read or heard, or where they start. Some because of their size. You also see that they go through kind of different motions. Some they start, okay, well, let sales do everything, and then they put in the growth team, and then the growth team takes it, and then they stall on the revenue. They move it back to sales. So there's a lot of confusion, and people are moving back and forward as their revenue or as their business is changing. But I would say I don't think there's a clear, solid framework that companies feel or people are equipped with to go and make the right choices. I think it's more like very influential on the latest podcast people heard and they pick around. So it's a lot of confusion.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's necessarily, to the point that you made right out of the gate, like it kind of depends. I like a model that when you get big, like you can focus on, you have your sales team focus on net new logos, but I don't think that you should ever extract your sales team 100% out of that experience. I think that it's important that you've got a team that only thinks about how to grow existing customers. It's a little bit more structured, but I think if you pull the original AE out of the mix entirely, it really hampers the relationship that you have with that client, because a good seller will spend 6, 9, 12 months closing a big enterprise deal only to go, you know what? Like, I'm out now. I got my commission check, and now it's the growth guy to take care of it. And then that person needs to spend 6, 12 months growing that relationship. So I like the idea of the more structured approach, but I would say never take the salesperson out of the account.
Well, to your point about scale, right? One of the things, the fundamentals that people forget about scaling is that when you scale, you start getting more specialization, right? First, you're jack of all trades, and then you get bigger, you get specialization. Sales is the specialized function that you have around securing revenue. And to do that, there's different layers of things that they have to execute really well, the relationship building. And, a sale at the end of the day is a very emotional kind of emotion, not emotion, but motion. So it's also emotion. But this is the point where the importance of the continuity of the relationship is because it was a very emotional journey that they had to make, and together they did it, and now they moved to the next level, and bring the CS as the enablers for their success. But especially if you're in a big situation, a big kind of deal, that connection is something really important. So again, specialize and make sure you understand what specialization each of your team members have, and don't drop it. And this will go into kind of my probably last thought about the expansion team here is that you need to make sure that they are kind of part of the overall, ecosystem, and they specialize in the signals and making sure and automation and things like that. But you can't have them separated from the real, let's call it real sales, and the real sales motions and the sales execution and the pipeline and the forecasting. They have to kind of get integrated into it versus become a separate unit that does something different.
So I guess, in closing, bottom line, like, who do you think should own it? Who should own the expansion revenue?
Well, it's the simplest solution is just keep it with sales. And you see a lot of companies starting that way. And it makes it easy because it's not, at that point, it's small and keep it working. And once you start scaling, then you start looking at these dedicated expansion teams, and growth teams can come into play. And just make sure it all connected to driving revenue, and don't lose, again, specialization, the people that know what to do in the different roles in working with the account to get to the expansion, that they get they get to do their job. But probably when you start, it's the easiest one. You get more sophisticated as you go along.
Yeah. And I guess, like, if your expansion motion is not working, like we talked about, I think the first place you want to look at is, what are your incentives? Like, how are you compensating these people? And are they being compensated in a way that is going to drive expansion at the risk of impacting new logos? Are you incentivizing people to drive new logos at the risk of chasing expansion? And I think it's so important that you find a balance there. And in the past, I've had to build comp plans that kind of pay out at equal levels, but maybe there are some different accelerators depending on which lever that I wanted to pull there.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about building an expansion team, a standalone, just make sure it's connected to the sales world and connected to revenue. It's not a standalone. It's not taking away from everybody else. And you're right, with compensation, you have to be really smart about it. Your emotions, and I think we've done it a few times before, of make it as an addition and incentives, not the one, so you won't fall into the traps we talked about earlier. It'd be a good motion to go about it.
Yeah, I love that. All right, well, that is it for today. I want to thank everybody for tuning into this episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Edan. I think that if you need help or guidance on building out and managing expansion revenue one way or the other, hit either of us up for some guidance and maybe some support. Again, if you like this show, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next week for some more Lunch Money.
See you then.